Have you ever had a feeling so strong, so cold in your gut that it forces you to drop everything and drive 500 miles on Thanksgiving Day? That was me, James Carter, 68 years old with hands calloused from a lifetime of work gripping the wheel of my old Ford pickup truck. The engine hummed a familiar tune, a low rumble that had been the soundtrack to my life for 2 decades. But on this day, it felt different. It sounded like a drumbeat counting down to something I couldn't yet see. I was on Interstate 75 heading south to Atlanta. This wasn't a planned holiday visit. There was no turkey defrosting in my kitchen, no cheerful phone call announcing my arrival. This was a mission, an intervention driven by an instinct so powerful it felt like my dear departed wife Eleanor was whispering a warning right into my ear. The feeling had been building for months, a slow creeping chill that had nothing to do with the harsh November wind whipping against my truck. It started as a small seed of doubt planted during hollow phone calls with my son Michael. Our conversations used to be real, filled with talk about the Falcons' chances this season or the new fishing lure I'd bought. Now they were transactions. I could almost hear the calculator clicking in the background. "Hey, Pops," he'd start, the warmth in his voice sounding rehearsed. "Listen, Brianna and I were thinking, the property taxes are just brutal this year and we're a little short. The next month it was a new landscaping project. The month after that it was dues for a country club I knew they couldn't afford. It was never, 'How are you feeling, Dad?' It was always, 'How much can you give?' Each call was a small chip at the foundation of what we once had, and I like a fool kept sending the money, hoping to patch the cracks I refused to see." I glanced at the empty passenger seat beside me, and for a moment I could almost see her there. My Eleanor. Her voice, as clear as the day she left this world, echoed in my memory. "James, listen to me," she had told me one evening, her hand resting on mine. "Our Michael, he has a good heart, a heart of gold. But his backbone is made of cotton. And that woman, Brianna, she's got a will of iron. She will bend him until he breaks, and he won't even realize he's broken." I had dismissed it then as a mother's worry. Now her words felt like a prophecy. I had paid the down payment on their sprawling house in that new, fancy suburb. I thought I was giving them a head start, a solid foundation. But what if Eleanor was right? What if I hadn't given my son a foundation but a gilded cage with Brianna holding the key? The sky was a blanket of dreary gray. The trees along the highway stripped bare, their skeletal branches reaching out like desperate fingers. It was a bleak picture, a world away from the cozy, perfect Thanksgiving image they probably had in their minds. A warm house filled with the smell of roasting turkey laughter bouncing off the walls, a perfect family portrait. But my gut, the same gut that told me when a support beam was weak or when a plot of land was unstable, was screaming that the portrait was a lie. A man who spends 40 years in construction, who builds things from the ground up with his own 2 hands, learns to trust his gut. It tells you when a foundation is cracked long before you see the fissure running up the wall. It warns you when the whole structure is about to come crashing down. As the miles disappeared behind me, the cold feeling in my stomach intensified. It was a heavy, solid thing now. I didn't know exactly what I would find when I reached their perfect house in its perfect neighborhood. I didn't know what face Michael would wear or what cold contempt I would see in Brianna's eyes. But I knew one thing for certain as I saw the first sign for Atlanta glowing in the distance. I wasn't coming for turkey. I wasn't coming for a slice of pumpkin pie. I was coming as an inspector to check the foundation of the family I had built. And I was prepared to find that it was rotten to the core. The street was exactly as I had imagined, a pristine cookie-cutter lane where every lawn was perfectly manicured and every mailbox stood at attention. It was the kind of neighborhood that screamed new money, a place where appearances were everything. I pulled my old truck to the curb a few houses down, the rumbling engine sounding like a growl in the quiet afternoon air. Michael and Brianna's house stood at the end of the cul-de-sac, a 2-story brick monster with large, imposing windows. It looked less like a home and more like a statement paid for with my sweat and savings. My first instinct was to walk up the polished stone walkway and ring the bell to pretend this was just a normal holiday visit. But my gut, that old reliable partner, told me to wait. It told me to look closer. So I did. I got out of the truck, the cold air hitting me like a physical blow. Instead of heading for the front door, I found myself walking along the side of the house, my worn work boots silent on the frozen grass. I felt like a trespasser, a stranger sneaking around the perimeter of a life I no longer recognized as part of my own. The sounds of the party grew louder as I neared the back. Laughter sharp and bright spilled out into the cold. I could hear music, some generic pop song that felt completely out of place on Thanksgiving. I peered through the bare branches of a dogwood tree towards the large deck and the glass sliding doors that led to the family room. And that's when I saw him. At first he was just a small, dark shape huddled near the bottom of the deck stairs, almost lost in the long shadows of the late afternoon. My mind couldn't process it. A pile of laundry. A discarded blanket. But then the shape moved. It trembled. I moved closer, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. It was Andre, my grandson, my only grandson. He was curled into a tight ball, his arms wrapped around his knees, trying to make himself as small as possible, as if he could disappear into the frozen ground. He was wearing a thin, long-sleeved shirt and jeans, clothes fit for a mild autumn day, not a brutal November freeze. His face was pale, almost gray, and his lips had a terrifying bluish tint. Tears had frozen into icy tracks on his cheeks, glistening in the faint light. He wasn't crying anymore. He was just shivering, a violent, uncontrollable shaking that seemed to rack his entire tiny body. My world tilted. The sounds of the party, the cold air, the very ground beneath my feet, it all faded away. All I could see was that small, suffering child. My gaze lifted from my grandson to the glass doors just a few feet away. Through the crystal-clear pane, I saw a scene from a magazine. A perfect Thanksgiving. Brianna was holding a glass of champagne, her head thrown back in laughter at something her father said. Her mother was arranging a platter of food on a table laden with a feast. I saw her siblings, cousins, a whole room full of strangers, all warm, all comfortable, all celebrating, and I saw my son, Michael. He was standing near the fireplace, a broad smile on his face, oblivious. He raised his own glass in a toast, his back turned to the window, his back turned to his own son freezing to death in his yard. The contrast was a physical assault, the warmth and light inside the bitter cold and darkness outside, the sound of their laughter, and the sound of my grandson's teeth chattering, the abundance of food on their table, and the emptiness of my grandson's suffering. A rage cold and pure and harder than any steel I had ever worked with rose up from the deepest part of my soul. This was not a punishment. This was torture. This was evil. My wife Eleanor's words came back to me then not as a whisper but as a roar. His backbone is made of cotton. She will bend him until he breaks. He hadn't just bent. He had shattered. In that moment, the love I had for my son was eclipsed by a tidal wave of contempt. I did not hesitate. The time for sneaking, for observing, was over. I walked back around to the front of the house, my steps heavy and deliberate on the frozen ground. Every detail was seared into my memory, the festive wreath on the door, the cheerful welcome mat, the symbols of a happy home that were nothing but a monstrous lie. I scooped Andre up from the ground. He was so light, so fragile. He let out a weak whimper and tried to flinch away, his eyes wide with fear, not even recognizing me at first through his misery. I held him tight against my chest, wrapping my thick coat around his small, trembling frame, trying to pour my own warmth, my own life into him. I walked up the stone steps carrying my precious cargo. I did not knock. I did not ring the bell. I drew back my right leg, the leg that had kicked down stubborn walls and braced against falling timbers for 40 years, and I kicked the grand, solid oak door right off its hinges. The door exploded inward with a sound like a thunderclap splintering from its frame and crashing onto the polished hardwood floor. Every head in the room snapped towards the doorway. The music stopped. The laughter died in their throats. Champagne glasses froze halfway to their lips. Their perfect portrait was shattered. I stood there in the gaping doorway, the cold wind rushing in behind me, holding my shivering grandson in my arms. I looked past the stunned faces of Brianna's family. I looked past the horrified gasp of Brianna herself. I looked directly into the shocked, guilty eyes of my son. And with a voice that was low, clear, and full of the terrible weight of justice, I said the 6 words that would bring their entire world crashing down around them. This is still my house. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the whistling of the wind through the shattered doorway. The festive scene was frozen, a perfect picture of shock and disbelief. Then, like a switch was flipped, the chaos erupted. Brianna was the first to find her voice, and it came out as a shrill, piercing shriek. "What is wrong with you?" she screamed, her face a twisted mask of fury. She pointed a trembling finger at me, her diamond rings flashing in the firelight. "Are you senile? Have you lost your mind? Michael, do something! Get this crazy old man out of our house! Now. Her family, who had been statues of surprise, began to murmur amongst themselves, their expressions shifting from shock to disapproval, all of it aimed at me. Michael rushed forward, his hands held up in a useless gesture of peace. His face was pale, his eyes darting between me and his enraged wife. "Dad, please," he pleaded, his voice thin and reedy. "Dad, calm down. Let's not make a scene in front of everyone. It was just a little discipline, that's all." Andre got his new white sneakers muddy. We told him not to. He tried to reach for Andre, but I shifted my body, shielding my grandson from him. I looked down at the child in my arms, his small body still racked with shivers, and then I looked back at my son. The excuse was so pathetic, so utterly disconnected from the reality of the situation that it stoked the fire of my rage into a blazing inferno. "A little discipline," I repeated, my voice dangerously low. Every person in that room leaned in the drama more compelling than any Thanksgiving parade. "That's what you call this. Let me tell you what I call it. I call it torture. I call it cruelty." I took a step into the room, my boots leaving wet, muddy tracks on the pristine hardwood floor. I didn't care. I wanted them to see the filth I was bringing in from their perfect world's ugly secret. I looked directly at Michael, but my voice was loud enough for every soul in that room to hear and judge. "The temperature outside is 15 degrees. 15. Do you have any idea what that does to a child's body? Do you know how quickly hypothermia sets in? While you were in here warm and comfortable, toasting with your champagne, my grandson, your son, was outside freezing. His lips are blue. Michael." His tears turned to ice on his face. "And for what? For a pair of shoes." I let the question hang in the air, heavy and damning. Brianna's father, a stout man with a self-important air, took a step forward. "Now see here," he began. "This is a private family matter." I turned my cold gaze on him. "This boy is my family. And this house," I said, my voice dropping again, "is my property. Which makes this my matter." I turned back to my son, who looked as if he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. "You are not a father," I said, the words coming out like chips of stone. "A father protects. A father teaches. A father would walk through fire for his child. You stood by a fireplace and let your son freeze for a piece of leather and rubber. You are a disgrace." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by Andre's weak, chattering teeth. Brianna let out another screech. "Get out! Get out of my house!" I ignored her completely, as if she were nothing more than a buzzing fly. My business was with my son, and my duty was to my grandson. I turned my back on all of them, a final gesture of contempt, and carried Andre towards the grand staircase. "I am taking him upstairs to get him warm. I suggest you tell your guests that the party is over," I said over my shoulder. Brianna continued to scream obscenities at my back, but her words had no power. They were the frantic noises of someone whose authority had just been stripped away in the most public and humiliating way possible. Upstairs in one of the guest bedrooms that I was sure was rarely used, I worked quickly. I stripped off Andre's cold, damp clothes and wrapped him in every blanket I could find in the closet, creating a warm, soft cocoon. I sat with him on the bed, holding him close, murmuring reassurances, telling him Grandpa was here, now that he was safe. It took a long time for the shivering to stop. He eventually drifted into an exhausted, troubled sleep, his small hand clutching my finger as if it were a lifeline. I sat there in the dark, listening to the sounds of the house below. I heard the awkward, hurried goodbyes of the guests, the slamming of car doors, and then a heavy, simmering silence. I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing, replaying the events of the day. The fury had cooled into a hard, heavy knot of sorrow and determination in my chest. Around midnight, I heard their voices rise from the living room below. An argument. I crept out of the bedroom, my socked feet silent on the plush carpet, and sat at the top of the stairs, hidden in the shadows. "He's never been like this," Michael was saying, his voice full of a desperate, whining confusion. "He just kicked the door in. In front of your parents." "What if he's right, Brianna?" The kid was freezing out there. Brianna's reply was not angry. It was something far more terrifying. It was cold, pragmatic, and utterly without remorse. "Right. Are you seriously asking me if he was right? Michael, he is trying to control us. He just ruined Thanksgiving, humiliated me in front of my entire family, and asserted his dominance in my home." "It's his home, technically," Michael mumbled. "Do not start with that," she snapped. Your father is a problem that just got a lot bigger. We had everything under control. Everything was moving along perfectly. Now he's here playing the hero. We have to get him out of here, Michael. We have to get him out before he ruins our plan." The word hung in the air between them. Plan. It wasn't just about the house. It wasn't just about the money. It was a plan. That single word confirmed every nameless fear, every gut feeling that had driven me here. This wasn't a family squabble over discipline. This was a calculated long-term strategy. My son wasn't just weak. He was a willing accomplice. As I sat there in the darkness, the last vestiges of hope for my son died. The sorrow in my heart hardened into something else. It hardened into resolve. This was no longer just about protecting Andre. This was a war. And as God is my witness, it was a war I intended to win. The morning after the storm was unnervingly quiet. The air in the house was thick with unspoken words, a cold truce born of mutual animosity. I was the first one up the habit of a lifetime. I went downstairs and found the broken door crudely propped shut, a sad monument to the previous night's battle. In the kitchen, I made a simple breakfast of scrambled eggs and toast, the familiar actions a small comfort in this hostile territory. Andre came downstairs a little while later looking small and lost in his pajamas. He saw me and froze his eyes immediately, darting towards the living room as if expecting his mother to appear like a phantom. I gave him a gentle smile. "Morning, champ," I said, my voice soft. "Made you some breakfast. It's your grandpa's specialty." He sat down at the table cautiously, his movements hesitant. I put the plate in front of him, and he began to eat in silence, his gaze fixed on his plate. I tried to talk to him, keeping my tone light. "How are you feeling today?" "All warmed up." He just nodded, not looking at me. "That was some scare you gave your old grandpa yesterday," I continued. "We can't have you turning into an icicle on my watch." He flinched at the mention of yesterday, a barely perceptible tremor that ran through his small frame. He kept his eyes down, his shoulders hunched. It was clear he had been warned. Brianna's poison had been dripped into his ear, and now he was afraid. Afraid of me, afraid of saying the wrong thing. I knew then that pushing him would be a mistake. It would only drive him further away. So I changed my approach. I didn't ask any more questions. Instead, I told him a story about when his dad Michael was his age. I told him about the time we built a treehouse in the old oak tree in our backyard, and how Michael had insisted on painting it bright red, calling it his rocket ship to the moon. A tiny smile touched the corner of Andre's lips. It was a start. It was a crack in the wall she had built around him. I knew that earning his trust would be a slow, patient process, like laying a foundation one brick at a time. Later that morning, I made my first official move. I announced that I was taking Andre to see Dr. Evans, our old family physician, just for a checkup. "After a chill like that, it's better to be safe than sorry," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. Just as I expected, Brianna emerged from the living room, her face a mask of concern. "Oh, Pops, what a wonderful, caring idea," she cooed, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Of course I'll come with you. I wouldn't miss it for the world. We have to make sure our little man is perfectly okay." It wasn't an offer. It was a statement. She was coming to run interference to control the narrative. The doctor's office was a sterile, tense environment. Dr. Evans was a good man, had been my doctor for 30 years. He had a kind face and sharp, observant eyes. Brianna immediately took charge, launching into a rehearsed speech before I could even open my mouth. "Dr. Evans, thank you for seeing us on such short notice," she began, her hand resting possessively on Andre's shoulder. "My father-in-law here worries so much, especially since his wife passed. Sometimes he gets things a little mixed up, don't you, Pops? Andre just played outside a little too long without a coat yesterday. You know how boys are, they lose track of time when they're having fun." She painted a flawless picture of a slightly forgetful, over-anxious grandfather and a perfectly normal family. I played my part. I nodded slowly, putting on a look of mild confusion. "Yes, I suppose I do worry," I said, looking at the doctor. "Old bones feel the cold, you know." And he was just so very cold. Shaking for hours, it seemed. He also looks awfully skinny to me. "Is he eating enough, Brianna?" My question was aimed at her, but my eyes were on the doctor, willing him to see past the performance. Brianna's smile tightened. "He's a growing boy, Pops. He eats like a horse. While Dr. Evans was examining Andre, Brianna's phone buzzed. She shot me a triumphant look and stepped out into the hallway to take the call. It was the opening I needed. I leaned closer to the doctor. Dave, I said, using his first name for the first time in years. A good doctor sees what's in front of him. A great doctor sees what's being hidden. For Eleanor's sake, please just give him a thorough look. The mention of my wife's name did the trick. A flicker of understanding crossed his face. He simply nodded, his expression serious as Brianna swept back into the room. After we left the clinic, I told Brianna I needed some fresh air and was going for a walk. She was so pleased with her performance at the doctor's office that she let me go without a fight. But I wasn't just going for a walk. I had a destination. I walked 2 houses down and knocked on the door of a small, tidy brick house. A moment later, the blinds fluttered and the door opened a crack. An elderly woman with kind, worried eyes peered out. "Mrs. Henderson, can I help you?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Mrs. Henderson," I said, keeping my voice low and gentle. "My name is James Carter. I'm Andre's grandfather." Her eyes widened with fear, and she started to close the door. "I'm sorry, I don't want any trouble," she whispered. "They're your family." I put my hand on the door, not to force it, but just to keep it from closing. "Please," I said, and all the pain and fear I felt for my grandson poured into that single word. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to protect him. I saw you watching from your window yesterday when I found him. I know you've seen things. I'm just an old man trying to do right by his grandkid, and I swear to you I can't do it alone." I saw a flicker of conflict in her eyes, the battle between fear and conscience. I pressed on, my voice cracking with genuine emotion. "My wife, Eleanor, she loved that boy more than life itself. I feel like I'm failing both of them. Please, if you know something, you have to help me." That was what broke through her fear, the shared pain of a grandparent. She slowly opened the door and ushered me inside. Her house was quiet and smelled of cinnamon. She sat me down at her small kitchen table and wrung her hands. "I was so scared," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It wasn't the first time. I've seen them leave him out on the porch for hours, even when it rained once. I hear her yelling at him all the time, calling him useless. I wanted to call someone, I really did. But I'm all alone here. I was afraid of what they might do." As she spoke, the story came tumbling out, a flood of details and dates that painted a grim, undeniable picture of neglect and emotional abuse. I just listened, my heart breaking with every word, but my resolve hardening into something unbreakable. I now had my first witness, the first solid brick in the new foundation I was building, the foundation of truth. A few days passed in a state of Cold War. The house remained quiet, but it was the heavy, suffocating silence of a battlefield after the first cannon has been fired. I spent my time with Andre rebuilding the trust that had been stolen from him, one shared story and one gentle smile at a time. I could feel Michael and Brianna watching me, their whispers stopping whenever I entered a room. They knew I had spoken to Mrs. Henderson. They must have suspected I had talked to the doctor. They were cornered animals, and I knew they would soon become desperate. The first move came from Michael, just as I expected. He found me in the living room one evening. I was sitting in an armchair by the cold fireplace, looking through an old photo album I had found on the shelf, a relic from a happier time. He approached slowly, his steps hesitant, like a child approaching a stern parent after doing something wrong. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, his shoulders slumped, the picture of misery. I turned a page in the album, a photo of a much younger Michael, maybe 10 years old, grinning proudly next to a wobbly treehouse. I didn't look up at him. I waited. Finally, his voice came thick and broken. "Dad," he said, the word choked with emotion. "Dad, I am so sorry." He sank to his knees in front of my chair, a theatrical gesture that immediately put me on high alert. He buried his face in his hands and his body began to shake with what appeared to be soul-wrenching sobs. "You were right," he choked out between breaths. "You were right about everything. Seeing Andre like that, I haven't slept. I look at him and I see a monster. I see myself. It was a good performance. I had to give him that. The guilt, the self, loathing it all seemed so real." He looked up at me, then his eyes red-rimmed and glistening with tears. "I let her change me, Dad. I don't even know who I am anymore." Brianna, she's so driven, so focused on things, on appearances. This house, the club, her parents' expectations. I got lost in it all. I got lost in her world, and I forgot how to be a good man. I forgot how to be a father. He skillfully shifted the blame, painting himself as a victim of his wife's ambition, a man led astray, not a willing participant in cruelty. He was trying to find the path of least resistance, the one that led back into my good graces, without him having to take full responsibility. Then he delivered the masterstroke, the emotional blow designed to disarm me completely. I keep thinking about Mom, he whispered, his voice cracking. I keep asking myself what she would say if she could see what I've become. She always knew how to keep me on the right path. Remember when I crashed your truck when I was 17, you were ready to kill me. But she just held me and told me that a mistake doesn't define a man. It's what he does after that counts. He reached out and gripped my knee, his touch surprisingly strong. I'm so lost without her, Dad. I need my family. I need you to tell me how to fix this. Please. For a heartbeat, the performance worked. My heart, the foolish, forgiving heart of a father, ached for him. I saw not the 42-year-old man kneeling before me, but the scared 17-year-old who had wrecked my truck. I saw the little boy in the photo album grinning from his rocket ship treehouse. Every instinct I had screamed at me to pull him into my arms, to tell him it would all be okay, to believe in the son I had raised. The anger in my chest began to dissolve, replaced by a wave of sorrow and a desperate hope that this remorse was real. I was about to speak, about to offer the forgiveness he was begging for. But then, as if she were standing right beside me, I heard Eleanor's voice, calm and clear as a bell, cutting through the fog of my emotion. James, our Michael, has a good heart. But his backbone is made of cotton. That single phrase was an anchor in the storm of his manufactured tears. A backbone of cotton. It can be shaped into anything. It can be bent, twisted, and controlled by a stronger will. I looked at my weeping son, and suddenly I saw the truth with painful clarity. I saw the strings. I saw the puppeteer Brianna standing just out of sight. These were not the tears of a man who had seen the error of his ways. These were the tears of a man who was terrified of losing his inheritance. He wasn't sorry for what he had done. He was sorry he had been caught. The softness in my heart hardened once more into cold, calculated resolve, but I did not let it show on my face. Exposing his lie now would only make them more defensive, more dangerous. I had to let them think their plan had worked. I had to play my part in their little drama. I reached out and placed my hand on his shoulder, my touch gentle. My voice when I spoke was soft, seemingly full of the fatherly compassion he was hoping for. "It's okay, son," I said, looking him in the eye. "Every man makes mistakes. It takes a strong man to admit it. We're family. Family finds a way to fix things." A wave of visible relief washed over his face. He thought he had won. He thought he had successfully neutralized the threat. "Thank you, Dad," he whispered, clutching my hand. "Thank you. We'll get through this." I continued, my voice steady. "You, me, and Brianna. We'll all sit down and talk. We'll figure it out together." He nodded eagerly, the tears already drying up, replaced by the smug look of a victor. He got up, gave my shoulder a final squeeze, and left the room, his step lighter than it had been in days. I watched him go, my expression unchanged. But inside, the battle lines had been redrawn. He thought he had put out the fire. He had no idea that he had just handed me a torch. The relief that washed over my son's face was a sickening sight. He thought he had won. He believed his pathetic, tear-filled performance had doused the flames of my anger and reset the board in his favor. I let him believe it. I spent the next day playing the part of the reconciled father, nodding along to his empty promises and ignoring Brianna's smug, triumphant glances. They were so confident in their manipulation, so sure of my weakness that they became careless. It was exactly what I needed. That night, after they had gone to bed, believing their future was secure once more, I slipped out of the silent house. I walked to my old truck, the one place on this property that still felt like my own, and closed the door, shutting out the world. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years, a number I prayed I would never have to use. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and familiar. Angela Franklin speaking. "Angela," I said, my voice low. "It's James Carter." There was a brief pause, a silence filled with 5 years of unspoken understanding. "James," she finally said, her tone softening with a weary sadness. "I've been waiting for this call. I just prayed it would never have to be made. Tell me, is it time?" "It's time, Angela." I confirmed, a heavy weight lifting from my chest as I said the words. It's time to open the Eleanor dossier. Angela Franklin wasn't just our family lawyer, she had been Eleanor's closest friend, her confidant since they were girls. No one knew my wife's heart or her fears better than Angela, and no one else knew about the final brilliant act of protection she had put in place before she passed. "Tell me everything," James, Angela said, and I could hear the sound of a pen scratching on paper, the lawyer in her taking over. I laid it all out for her, my voice a steady, unemotional monotone, as I recounted the events of the last few days. I told her about finding Andre in the cold, the details of his condition, every heart-wrenching shiver. I told her about my visit with Dr. Evans and the seeds of doubt I had planted. I told her about my conversation with the brave, terrified Mrs. Henderson next door. And finally, I told her about Michael's crocodile tears and the conversation I had overheard, the one that mentioned their plan. When I finished, there was another long silence on the line. "She saw it all coming, didn't she?" Angela said, her voice full of a sorrowful admiration. "That magnificent woman. She saw it all. She tried to warn me," I admitted, shame and regret twisting in my gut. "I just didn't want to listen." "It's hard to see the cracks in a foundation you built yourself," James, Angela said gently. But Eleanor didn't rely on hope. She relied on foresight. "The dossier is ready. It's not just a single document. It's a series of legal tripwires she had me build into the will and the family trust." She began to explain the genius of it, the intricate legal fortress Eleanor had designed. She had me write in something we called the Family Integrity Clause, Angela detailed. It's an ethics provision. It states that if the primary heir, Michael, is found to engage in acts of cruelty, child neglect, gross financial negligence, or any action that brings profound shame and dishonor upon the Carter family name, he forfeits his entire inheritance, immediately and irrevocably. I felt a swell of pride and love for my late wife that was so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. Even from beyond the grave, she was protecting us. She was fighting this battle right alongside me. The clause also stipulates that in the event of his forfeiture, the entire estate is to be placed into a new trust with you as the sole executor for the exclusive benefit of Andre Carter upon his 18th birthday. Angela continued. Eleanor thought of everything. She built a lifeboat for her grandson while the ship was still sailing. "So what's our next move?" I asked, my mind clear and focused for the first time in days. "Your move was perfect," Angela replied. "By pretending to forgive him, you've made them overconfident. They believe they're in control. Now we let them make the next mistake. They will likely try to formalize their control over your finances, probably by claiming you're incompetent. We let them. We let them call a meeting with their lawyer. We let them walk right into the trap Eleanor set for them 6 years ago." A plan began to form in my mind, sharp and clear. "They think I'm a foolish old man," I said, a grim smile touching my lips for the first time in what felt like an eternity. "Good," Angela said, a hint of steel in her voice. "Let them. Get a written notarized statement from Mrs. Henderson. Get a copy of that medical report from Dr. Evans. And James, see if you can get them to put their plans for you in writing. An email, a text, anything. Their greed will make them sloppy." The call ended with a clear path forward. I was no longer just a grandfather acting on instinct. I was the executor of my wife's final will and testament, a legal instrument forged from a mother's fierce, undying love. I hung up the phone and looked at the big house, dark and silent against the night sky. They were sleeping soundly inside, dreaming of their victory. They had no idea they were living on borrowed time in a house that was no longer theirs, their future already signed and sealed by the ghost of the woman they had so gravely underestimated. 2 days after my son's masterful performance of regret, the official summons arrived. It was delivered not by a heartfelt phone call, but by a crisp, formal email from a law firm I had never heard of. Brianna, with a look of profound, feigned sorrow, informed me that they had scheduled a family meeting to discuss the future and ensure everyone was protected. The language was corporate, sterile, and utterly devoid of love. It was the language of a hostile takeover. She had even arranged for my lawyer, Ms. Franklin, to be present, a gesture she thought showed transparency, but which I knew was a sign of her supreme overconfidence. She believed she had already won, that this meeting was nothing more than a formality. She had no idea she was the one who had just been served. The meeting was held in the grand formal dining room, a room I had paid for but had never seen used for a family meal. The long, polished mahogany table felt more like a boardroom than a place to break bread. On one side sat Michael and Brianna, dressed in sharp, dark business attire. Between them sat their lawyer, a man named Mr. Davies, who looked exactly like the kind of person you would hire to evict a widow on Christmas Eve. He had a practiced, sympathetic smile and cold, calculating eyes. On the other side of the table sat Angela Franklin and me. And next to me in a chair pulled close sat Andre. Brianna had protested his presence, but I was firm. This is about his future. I had said my tone, leaving no room for debate. He stays. Michael and Brianna entered the room with the solemn gravity of people attending a funeral, but their eyes held the unmistakable glint of victors. They looked at me with a carefully rehearsed pity, as if I were a cherished but dying pet they were about to put out of its misery. The air was thick with tension, a silence so profound you could almost hear the dust motes settling on the polished table. Mr. Davies cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice as smooth as polished marble. "We are here today not out of conflict, but out of deep, abiding concern for Mr. James Carter's well-being." He opened a thick leather briefcase and produced a file, placing it on the table with a soft, authoritative thud. Over the past several weeks, Michael and Brianna have grown increasingly worried about certain changes in Mr. Carter's behavior. We have therefore arranged for a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation from a renowned specialist in geriatric cognitive health, Dr. Alistair Finch. A doctor I had never met, a name I had never heard. The lies were beginning. The results of this evaluation, he continued tapping the file, are deeply concerning. He put on a pair of reading glasses and began to read from a page, his voice filled with false gravitas. Mr. Carter exhibits clear signs of memory loss, pronounced paranoia, and erratic emotional behavior, all consistent with the early stages of dementia. He looked up at me over his glasses, his eyes full of that practiced sympathy. The unfortunate incident on Thanksgiving, for example, is cited here as a classic symptom. A violent, unprovoked outburst triggered by a minor misunderstanding. A clear sign of a mind struggling to process reality. He made my righteous anger sound like the ravings of a madman. It was a brilliant, despicable strategy. Brianna dabbed at a dry eye with a handkerchief. "It has been so difficult to watch," she said, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "We love him so much. All we want is to ensure he is safe and cared for." Then it was Michael's turn. He looked directly at me, his eyes pleading the perfect image of a devoted son forced to make an impossible choice. "Dad," he said, his voice thick with hypocrisy, "this is the hardest thing I have ever had to do. But I'm doing it to protect you. I'm doing it to protect your legacy. I can't stand by and watch you fade away making decisions that could put you at risk. It's what Mom would have wanted. She would have wanted us to take care of you." The invocation of my wife's name was the ultimate betrayal, a poisoned dagger he twisted with a sad, loving smile. Throughout their entire presentation, their speeches, their fake tears, I remained silent. I did not protest. I did not get angry. I did not shout or argue. I simply sat there, my hands resting on the table, my gaze steady. I looked at each of them as they spoke, letting them spin their web of lies, letting them dig their own graves. My calmness was not what they expected. I could see a flicker of uncertainty in Mr. Davies' eyes. He was used to shouting matches to emotional outbursts that would help prove his case. My silence was a weapon he did not know how to fight. It unnerved him. It made them all uneasy. They had rehearsed for a storm, and I was giving them nothing but a dead, unnerving calm. Finally, Mr. Davies, seeing his performance was having no visible effect, decided to move to his closing argument. He pushed a stack of legal documents across the table towards me. For his own protection, he announced to the room, and to safeguard the assets he worked so hard to build, "We have prepared these documents. They grant his loving and responsible son, Michael Carter, durable power of attorney over all financial and medical matters." He tapped the last page with a manicured finger. "So, Mr. Carter, if you would just sign here, we can put this difficult but necessary process behind us. We can finally move forward together as a family that takes care of its own." The room fell silent once more. All eyes were on me. The trap, their perfect, elegant, heartless trap, had been sprung. They still thought it was their trap. They had no idea they were the ones who were already caught in the jaws of the steel. The documents lay on the table between us, a declaration of war disguised as an act of love. Mr. Davies, their lawyer, leaned back in his chair, a smug, self-satisfied look on his face. Michael and Brianna were watching me, a mixture of pity and predatory anticipation in their eyes. They were waiting for me to pick up the pen. They were waiting for the final quiet surrender. I let the silence stretch, filling the room with a heavy, unbearable tension. Then I slowly turned my head, met the calm, steady gaze of Angela Franklin, and gave her the slightest, almost imperceptible nod. The time for defense was over. It was time to attack. Angela leaned forward, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. She looked at Mr. Davies, her expression one of professional admiration. "A very thorough plan, Mr. Davies," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. The psychiatric evaluation is a particularly insidious touch. It's well crafted. But Mrs. Eleanor Carter was even more thorough. With a quiet, deliberate motion, she placed her own file on the table. It was an old, worn leather portfolio, thick with papers. It looked less like a legal file and more like a family Bible. "I believe you've all met my client, Mr. James Carter," she said, her voice now filling the room with a newfound authority. "But I'd like to introduce you to his partner in these proceedings, my late and very dear friend, Eleanor Carter. She asked me to prepare this dossier 6 years ago. Let's call it her final act of family protection." A flicker of confusion then alarm crossed Brianna's face. Michael just looked lost. Mr. Davies' professional smile faltered. Angela opened the portfolio. "First things first," she said, pulling out a document. "You've presented a rather creative report from a Dr. Alistair Finch, a man whom my client has never met. Allow me to present a report from Dr. David Evans, the Carter family's physician for over 30 years, following an examination 2 days ago." She began to read, her voice clear and damning. "Andre Carter presents as underweight for his age and height. Blood analysis shows abnormally elevated levels of cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone consistent with a child living in a state of chronic anxiety or fear. There are also signs of mild malnutrition." She looked up, her eyes locking on to Brianna's. Brianna's face, which had been a mask of concerned sorrow, began to tighten, the first crack appearing in the flawless facade. "Second," Angela continued, sliding another paper across the table, "you have framed my client's righteous anger on Thanksgiving as a symptom of paranoia. Allow me to introduce the notarized sworn statement of Mrs. Loretta Henderson, a neighbor." Again, her voice filled the room. "On at least 4 separate occasions in the past 6 months, I have witnessed Andre Carter being forced to stand outside on the porch for hours at a time as a punishment, including once during a heavy rainstorm. I have frequently heard Mrs. Brianna Carter shouting at the child, calling him useless and a little brat." Michael went pale. He sank lower in his chair as if trying to become invisible. He wouldn't look at me. He wouldn't look at anyone. He stared at the polished surface of the table as if it held the answers to his ruined life. "Third," Angela said, her voice hardening, "you, Michael, through your lawyer, have framed this action as a noble effort to protect your father's assets. That is particularly interesting." She produced a thick stack of bank statements and fanned them out on the table like a winning hand of cards. "These are the statements from the family trust your father so generously set up for you. Let's see here. 3 years ago, a $70,000 withdrawal for a new Lexus. 2 years ago, $50,000 for memberships to the Northwood Country Club. Numerous withdrawals for vacations to the Bahamas, shopping sprees at Saks Fifth Avenue. In total, over $200,000 of your father's retirement money has been embezzled to fund a lifestyle you clearly cannot afford on your own." Brianna finally broke. "That's a lie," she hissed. "James gave us that money." "They were gifts." "Were they?" Angela asked calmly. "Because there are no gift letters on file, and the trust explicitly forbids withdrawals of this size without a formal written request for a stated purpose. This isn't protection, Mr. Davies. This is grand larceny." Mr. Davies was sweating now. His smooth, professional veneer had completely evaporated, leaving behind a nervous, cornered man who was beginning to realize he had been played. But Angela was not finished. She paused, letting the weight of the financial betrayal settle in the room. Then she reached back into the portfolio. "But of course," she said softly, "the most compelling and most heartbreaking piece of evidence isn't about the money. It's about the motive." She pulled out a small, sleek tablet and placed it in the center of the table. Concerned for his grandson's safety after the events of Thanksgiving, my client installed a small motion-activated security camera in the living room. It recorded a rather illuminating conversation just last night. She pressed play. The screen flickered to life, showing the living room from the night before. It showed Michael pacing back and forth, wringing his hands. And it showed Brianna sitting on the sofa, looking at her phone, the picture of bored indifference. The audio was crystal clear. "I'm telling you, Bree," Michael's tinny voice said from the speaker. My dad believed me. He's calmed down. I think we're going to be okay." Brianna didn't even look up from her phone. "Of course he believed you, Michael. He's an old fool who still thinks you're that little boy from his photo albums." Then she looked up, her face a mask of pure reptilian coldness, and she delivered the words that sealed their fate. "Stop whining, it's almost over. As soon as he signs those papers tomorrow, we can ship him off to the nicest, most expensive care home this money can buy. And we will finally never have to see your useless son's face again. We can sell this house and have the life we actually deserve." Angela stopped the video. The silence that filled the room was no longer just tense. It was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. It was the sound of a family dying. I watched my son. Michael's face had crumpled completely. He looked utterly broken, a hollowed-out man, the full weight of his betrayal, his weakness, and his greed crashing down on him in one devastating wave. He stared at the black screen of the tablet as if he had just seen a ghost. But it was Brianna's reaction that I will never forget. Her mask did not just crack, it shattered into a million pieces. The beautiful, concerned, loving wife and mother was gone. In her place was something ugly, something twisted with pure, undiluted hatred. Her eyes fixed on me were like chips of ice. The trap was sprung. The truth was out. And the woman who had tried to destroy my family was finally irrevocably exposed for all the world to see. The black screen of the tablet reflected the shattered faces of my son and his wife. The silence in the room was a living thing, thick and suffocating, poisoned by the truth that had just been unleashed. Mr. Davies, their once confident lawyer, was the first to move. He looked at the damning evidence on the tablet, then at his clients, his expression a mixture of professional horror and personal disgust. Without a word, he began to slowly, methodically pack his leather briefcase. The snap of the latches was like a judge's gavel falling a final damning verdict. The legal fight was over. He knew it. He was abandoning a sinking ship. Angela Franklin let the silence hold for another long moment, ensuring the full weight of their treachery had settled upon them. Then she picked up one final document from the Eleanor dossier. Her voice when she spoke was no longer that of a lawyer but of an executor carrying out a sacred duty. And now she said her words addressed to the room but meant for Michael for the final piece of business. As stipulated in the last will and testament of Eleanor Rose Carter. She began to read from the document, her voice clear and formal, each word a hammer blow against the foundation of their lives. Article 4, Section 3, she read, the Family Integrity Clause. It is my deepest held belief that this family's legacy is not one of material wealth, but one of moral character. Therefore, the inheritance of the Carter Family Trust is conditional. Should the primary heir, Michael James Carter, engage in or be found complicit in acts of child neglect, cruelty, gross financial negligence, or any action that brings profound and demonstrable shame upon the family name, he shall be deemed to have violated this sacred trust. In such an event, his status as heir is to be considered immediately and irrevocably forfeit. The authority to make this determination rests solely with the executor of my will, my husband James Carter. She placed the document down on the table. The legal mechanism was revealed. The trap so lovingly and carefully constructed by my wife years ago had been sprung. All that was left was for me to deliver the final judgment. I slowly, deliberately pushed my chair back and rose to my feet. The scrape of the chair legs on the hardwood floor seemed to echo in the cavernous silence. I did not look at Brianna, whose face was a contorted mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. I did not look at her lawyer, who was now inching towards the door. I looked only at my son. He was still staring at the tablet, his face ashen, his body trembling. He looked like a man who had just watched his own soul die. My voice when I spoke was not filled with rage. The fire had burned out, leaving behind only the cold, hard ash of resolution. "Michael," I said, and his head snapped up, his eyes wide with a final desperate plea. "As of this moment, under the terms of the Family Integrity Clause established by your mother, you are hereby disinherited." The words hung in the air, absolute and irreversible. He let out a sound, a choked, guttural sob that was ripped from the very core of his being. I gave him no time to recover. "This is my house," I continued, my voice steady. "You and your wife will have 30 days to vacate the premises. You will take only your personal belongings and nothing more." A strangled gasp came from Brianna's direction. I ignored it. Finally, I said, delivering the final blow. All assets, properties, and funds previously held in the Carter Family Trust will be legally transferred into a new, irrevocable trust. The sole beneficiary of that trust will be Andre Carter. It was then that Michael completely collapsed. He slid from his chair onto the floor, landing on his knees with a dull thud. He crawled towards me, his expensive suit bunching at his knees, his hands outstretched like a beggar. "Dad, no!" He sobbed, tears and snot streaming down his face. "Please, Dad, don't do this to me. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll do anything. I'll leave her. I swear I'll leave her today. Please, Dad, you can't. I have nothing. I'm your son. I'm your son." His pleading was pathetic, the undignified death rattle of a weak man who had just lost everything. As Michael fell apart, Brianna exploded. The last shred of her civilized veneer was ripped away, revealing the shrieking, venomous creature beneath. She shot to her feet, her chair flying backwards and crashing against the wall. "You old fool," she screamed, her voice cracking with pure fury. "You think you've won. You've ruined everything. Everything we built." She then turned her rage on her weeping husband. "And you," she spat, pointing a trembling finger at him. "Get up! Get off the floor, you weak, spineless coward! Stop begging him! It's over!" She looked around the room, her eyes wild, and they finally landed on Andre, who had been watching the entire scene with wide, silent eyes. "This is all your fault," she hissed at the small boy. "You and your muddy shoes. You useless little brat." I had heard enough. I had seen enough. Their words, their tears, their rage, none of it could touch me anymore. It was just noise, the meaningless sound of a collapsing structure. I looked down at my son sobbing on the floor at my feet, and I felt nothing but a profound and bottomless pity. I turned away from him and walked over to my grandson. I knelt down in front of him, shielding him from the chaos. "It's over now, champ," I said softly. "Let's go home." I gently scooped him up into my arms, his small body fitting perfectly against mine. He buried his face in my shoulder, his arms wrapping tightly around my neck. Without looking back at the wreckage of my son and his wife, without another word, I carried Andre out of the dining room. I walked past the broken front door, across the threshold, and out into the clean, cold air, leaving them behind in the ruins of the house they had tried to steal, a house that had never truly been their home. A month later, the house was quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet. It was not the heavy, oppressive silence of before, but a peaceful, gentle quiet filled with the soft crackle of a fire in the hearth and the murmur of a happy child. The grand, impersonal furniture was gone, replaced by my own comfortable, worn armchairs and sturdy wooden tables. The air no longer smelled of Brianna's expensive, cloying perfume, but of lemon polish and the faint, pleasant scent of burning oak. The house had been cleansed. Michael and Brianna were gone, a chapter of my life that had closed not with a bang, but with the quiet turning of a page. There was no anger left in me, for them only a deep, abiding sadness for the son I had lost long before that terrible Thanksgiving day. Andre and I were on the floor, in the middle of the living room, surrounded by the pieces of a miniature log cabin kit. His tongue was stuck out in concentration, as he carefully placed a small wooden beam onto the structure. "A little more to the left, Grandpa," he said, his voice bright and clear. "It has to be perfect. This is the main support beam." I smiled, my heart swelling with a love so fierce it almost hurt. This was a different boy from the silent, terrified child I had carried out of this house. The fear was gone from his eyes, replaced by the bright, curious spark of childhood. The haunted silence had been filled with laughter, with endless questions about bugs and stars, and what it was like to build real houses. He was healing. We were healing. He placed the final piece on the roof and leaned back, a proud grin spreading across his face. "We did it, Grandpa," he declared. "We built a real home." I looked from the small model to the happy, healthy boy beside me, and his words struck me with the force of a profound truth. All my life I had been a builder. I had built houses, decks, entire structures of wood and steel and stone. I had taken pride in the strength of my foundations and the honesty of my work. But I realized now that for years I had been living in a house with the weakest foundation of all, a house built not on love and integrity but on greed and lies. I had to tear that house down, board by board, to save the one precious thing that truly mattered. My wife Eleanor used to say that a legacy is not what you leave for people, but what you leave in people. For so long I thought my legacy would be the money, the property, the comfortable life I provided. I was wrong. My true legacy was sitting right here beside me on the floor, his eyes shining with the pride of creation. My legacy would be the safety I was building around him, the love I was pouring into his foundation, the integrity I would teach him to value above all else. This was the most important construction project of my life. I had demolished a house built on greed to build a home founded on truth. And it would be a home with a foundation so strong that no storm could ever shake it. A legacy is not the wealth you leave behind in your will, but the integrity you build in your children's character. When greed corrodes the foundation of a family, true love must become the architect of its reconstruction, even if it means tearing the old structure down completely.